Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Music Production Podcast, the show where we talk about all things related to making music. And today, I have a very special guest. Well, my name is Brian Funk. I'm your host. I should say that. And our guest today is Abid Hussain. And Abid is an Ableton certified trainer, musician, guitarist, producer. He's also a business attorney, so he's got some interesting stuff for us from a musical perspective, though it's not official legal advice. We'll give the little disclaimer in the beginning there. But Abid's been putting out music for quite a while now, around 20, 25 years or so. One thing I'm really interested in talking to him about is he's a guitarist, comes from like an alternative rock, post-punk background, which is fun for me personally. And we're both Ableton certified trainers, so we're in this little family together. And I think you're going to find some very useful information from him today, and I'm excited to pick his brain as well. So, Abid, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you too. I've really shared your video about sampling and copywriting from Ableton Loop many times, actually. When people ask me like about the legalities of sampling, I just send them that video.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for
that was such a, yeah, absolutely. That was such a high point for me. I've been a practicing attorney for almost 13 years, and I've been making music for, 25 plus years. And so to bring those worlds together and talk about something that's both current and unresolved and constantly in flux was a lot of fun. It was really just a dream to be able to talk at Loop. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised to see how it was received. It seems like it impacted people in an interesting way, especially because the topic is just so murky, and technology is so much faster than the courts that are trying to come up with an answer. It's almost like how do you put the genie back in the bottle? You can't, and it was really cool to be able to boil it all down in 15 minutes, and it was received nicely. So that was great.
Yeah, it's super helpful, nice and condensed information. That's a really good point about how just technology is moving faster than the slow wheels of justice and the law can keep up.
Sure.
With a lot of
I think part of that is really the idea that I've been using Ableton Live since version 3 and since version 4 as my main DAW, and one of the reasons I think Live is just so popular is because it still manages to keep things simple while the feature sets keep getting deeper and deeper. And so, I think it was in the Live 9 where we had those MIDI extraction tools where you could extract, notes and beats out of actual audio. And, again, something that is quite capable with technology, but wasn't really implemented well until Ableton came along and made it kind of very commonplace, right? And now, it puts all sorts of ideas of how you're copying somebody else's work on its head, because it's not technically sampling, it's not technically stealing, it's not technically an infringement, and yet you're able to extract somebody else's work and use it in your own, and then you get a case that goes in front of a middle-aged judge who has no idea what digital audio is. And suddenly you've got a tension between somebody who's actually having to make a rule based on technology that is significantly outpacing the way that person even comprehends what music is. Right. And so it's a really interesting time, and I love it. I love gray area. I love like not having well-defined rules about that kind of stuff. That's great.
Yeah, you're right. And those are important decisions that get placed in the hands of sometimes people. It's very difficult for me to explain to people what I do,
right.
even just as far as like if I make like Ableton Live packs and tutorials,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's much easier for me to just say I teach music production than it is to be like, well, I'm
Right.
creating sounds that other producers can use in their music, and
Hmm.
it's a lot for people to digest, unless they're
Right.
really into it and they know what like sound packs are, uh,
Right.
or kind of have their feet in the water already. That's definitely a topic we need to get to for sure, because there's a lot I need to understand, and I know a lot of people have these questions. So I look forward to talking to you about that.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe as like a lead up to that kind of stuff, you can let us know how this all connects. I always find it interesting when two different worlds kind of collide within a single
Right. Right.
person. Like you're saying, like music production and then like law all kind of came together at this loop talk. And I'm sure, as it was happening, you didn't see it coming, but probably looking back, it makes a lot of sense now.
Well, it made a lot of sense in the past too, but I never really pursued it. I think so. To kind of take you back and talk a little bit about my background, I started making music probably very, very late in the game. I'd say I didn't even buy my first guitar till I was maybe 15 or 16. I've never had any formal musical training, and so I was listening to a Cure record and started jamming on it with a guitar, and that was like the first thing I taught myself how to play. And then,
Nice.
from there, it went on to understanding digital audio. Well, not even digital back then. It was 4-track tapes, and I made a whole bunch of albums just off of a 4-track and a drum machine and a Roland Juno and a guitar, and that was it. And then from there, and I'd like to come back to that because the limited scope of what I had in front of me was incredibly inspiring, and I made 6, 7 albums on a very short period of time. Whereas now I have infinite capability with Ableton Live, and I make very little music on a day to day. So let's touch back on that issue. But
Yeah.
as I was going through my undergrad years, I was putting out song after song. And album after album, and all with just a very rudimentary setup. And kind of as I got into the tail end of my college years, knowing that I was going into law school, I thought about entertainment law. I thought about my interest in music, but I never saw a real bridge between the two. I felt, and as kind of I went through my legal career, and I kind of, how do I put this? I kind of got to a point where I decided that I didn't want to merge art and business. So the way I explain it is that when it comes to music, and I'm not one of those prima donnas or tortured artists who's like, oh no, I got, like, it's my art or some nonsense like that. Like that's not, I don't look at it that way. It's more just, I want to make whatever kind of music I want to make without worrying about the financial implications of it, how it affects or tarnishes my reputation.
Yeah.
I want to make whatever inspires me to make music. That's it. And by not tying it to money, I can do that. Right. And on the flip side, when it comes to my legal work, it's all about finances. It's about how I make a living. And I care very much about, my work output, my reputation in the community of lawyers. And so, like, I've separated business from music. And it's not that I didn't try. There was a time when I lived in Los Angeles for about a year. I worked in a studio, and I wanted to get into the music business, but it just didn't seem like a natural fit for me. And so as a result, I've produced 14 albums, 270 songs, but it's not anything that I care about trying to sell. I mean, I have it online, and, it's always a pleasant surprise when somebody, pays me. Like I have my stuff on Bandcamp, and sometimes people will send me, they'll buy a song for $1 and send me a $5 tip. And I'm like, yeah, that's fabulous. It's wonderful to know somebody enjoyed my music like that, but I don't do that for money. And so, you'd think that there'd be a natural fit for me to do that. But there really hasn't been, because of that separation that I did a long time ago. And now it's, when I pitched the idea to Ableton, I think it was beginning about a year ago when they sent out an email asking for ideas for loop talks. And I said, well, hey, I'm an attorney and I'm also, a certified trainer. And I also understand these concepts of copyright, and both in practice as a musician and both from a legal perspective. What if I could give a talk where I explain the copyright law of, the laws of the land at this point in the U.S. And then I broke those rules in a way that explained how ridiculous they are and how we're in this gray area of something that may be protected and may also be an infringement. What if I did that and kind of left everybody hanging? That's how I pitched it, and they were like, "Well, that sounds fantastic. Let's do that." And so it was the first time that I think it all came together, and I think the reason it came together is probably because I had enough expertise in both areas to be able to talk about it in a very niche kind of way where I did leave it hanging. I think that if I were just a musician talking about this, I'd have, one perspective. And if I were just an attorney talking about this, I'd have another perspective, and both would try to give people answers. And instead, I approached it by leaving people with questions. And I think that's why it worked for me in this moment. Wow, that was a super long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. It's interesting too, because I think that kind of dual perspective is important, because it's so many things in music get all messed up because there's only like one perspective coming at it. Whether it's you're playing a show and you're the band, you want to get paid and you want this, but then you got the club owner who needs to keep the lights on and who's got to pay the bills. And there's always this like tension there. Or, just on the various different jobs of making music, from like engineering and songwriting and putting out hits, a lot of this stuff conflicts, but it's nice to have that kind of both sides of the coin going on in one person.
Well, yeah, I mean, it takes it takes a while to figure out what your identity is when you have two separate tracks like that. But
yeah.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
In my ripe old age, I'm getting there.
Yeah, it seems to make a lot of sense to me, and I'm thankful for your work in that regard.
Yeah, thank you.
It seemed to me like the kind of lesson of the talk was sort of like, you should just always get your samples cleared. Is that the safest?
Well, I mean,
bet?
that is the safest thing, and that's what I do. So anytime, for example, if I'm if I find something that I really like in any sample pack or whatever, that's the easy one. I can just buy the sample pack and I'm good to go, right? And as a tip for some of your listeners, I'll tell you that I'm always I enjoy sample surfing whenever there's a sale. So like, for example, these sample packs that are sometimes $30, $50 or whatever. Anytime, usually during like summertime or end of the year, they drop so drastically, and it's like $7 for a pack of vocal samples, and you have like 10 songs in there that you can make out of it. So it's kind of cool. So that's the easy part. But I think what's much more prevalent now is, and I find myself doing it and other people doing it, is, you're surfing on YouTube and you find something you really like and you just grab a recording of it, and then you stick it in live and start manipulating it with, Simpler or Sampler or, some of the MIDI extraction tools. And before you know it, you've made it your own, but the source is still in your song. And that is sometimes a clear infringement. And now you got an interesting problem. How do you clear that? And for most everyday bedroom producers, that's, it's cost prohibitive. You can reach out to the Harry Fox agency and try to get it cleared, but that might be very expensive. And they'll ask you questions like, well, how many of these do you expect to sell? And some of these people are going, what do you mean sell? I want to just put it on Spotify. Yeah. It's like we're so far ahead from like these standards that people use to try to figure out how to clear things. And like, it's just, the gap is just widening further and further. Right. So yes, the general rule is clear, all samples. But what if you can't, or what if it's too cost prohibitive? What happens then? What if you've transformed it so much that it's now a protected derivative use? And what's the standard there? How do you know? So those are all very, very interesting questions. And while I think that the tools are there for all sorts of creative, endless possibilities, the biggest nightmare for a budding artist is to have a hit song that has some sort of recognizable sample. Because at that point, the more streams you get, the bigger the target on your back is.
Yeah.
The more popular your song gets, the more likely you're going to get sued.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the danger that I think a lot of artists don't think about when they're just kind of getting started. I couldn't tell you songs that I did back in, the 90s. I couldn't tell you if they're completely clear. I mean, back then I was creating my own sounds, but what if I know, for example, there's one album that I did that was full of like Star Trek samples.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Full of them. I couldn't release that now, because I'd have to get all sorts of clearance, and but I didn't think about that back then because I was young and I was just like, hey, I just want to get my song done, right? Or just want to get this album done, the concept album, and whatever. So I guess that is the rule, which is get cleared whenever possible. But then there's all sorts of gray area beyond that. So.
Well, maybe to dispel a myth, I've heard this in various forms, something like, well, if you only sample 2 or 3 seconds, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Nope, never okay.
Never okay.
Never okay. Using somebody else's uncleared sample is never okay, no matter how short.
No time limit, right? Not even if it's a quarter
none
of a
at
second.
All. No.
Yeah.
Nope. The only thing that you can hang your head on is that if you have transformed it enough that it is completely unrecognizable, in which case it begs the question, what is the point, right? What is the point? Like you and I, and let's get, nerdy for just 2 seconds. Okay. You and I both know that we can microsample stuff like crazy with samplers, super easy, mm-hmm. right? You can grab a piece of audio, stick it in sampler, go down to one cycle, create a waveform, get a pitch out of it, and then start creating a sound like a pad or a bass or whatever, right? Out of that one sound. Right. But that's not the point of sampling. That's essentially, a very small form of wavetable synthesis, right? So it's like you can't, like, what is the point of taking a sample like that and stick it into your music when you can't recognize them? The whole art form of sampling is that there's kind of a nod to the original. Like, oh, I kind of recognize it. I've heard that somewhere before. That's why it's cool. So therein is the tension, is that like, how can you have a reference to something, but then not have it cleared? Like, if you transform it so it's not recognizable, what's the point? Mm-hmm. And that's what I did in my loop talk, is I created 2 pieces of audio that had nothing to do, like, they were so transformed you couldn't even recognize them, and yet they were infringing 2 extremely popular songs. Like, if I released those songs, I would absolutely expect to get sued, right? Or at least a cease and desist letter from the record companies, right?
Right.
So, but they're very unrecognizable. So what's the point there? And that's what's interesting.
Hmm. So the point is, yeah, you can mangle it until it's unrecognizable, but then you lose out on that reference or that kind of like maybe a cultural statement you're trying to make.
Right.
What if you're, just to play around with it, like, let's say I wanted just like a snare drum sound or something, so it's not so much about like the reference, it's just I like the way that drum sounds.
Yeah.
It's still the same issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same issue because somebody might recognize that drum sound, or if they can extract that drum sound and do some sort of analysis that showed that it was the exact same drum sound. Like I think an interesting example of that is that, drums these days are mixes in general these days are not, they're so mixed that it's hard to extract anything out of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that from the 70s, especially in the 80s, when you started having those big reverb drums and also the reverse reverb drums that like Genesis and Phil Collins and those guys all were using back then, I think that's a very interesting thing, because those were signature drums, signature 80s drums.
Yeah.
And so if you found something like that, and back then the mixes weren't so over compressed that like you could literally extract a drum sound out of a song. And then you could, you could use that in your samples, right? But then what if somebody were to take your drum sound and match it to another drum sound, and suddenly now you got two, what I think is, what I tell people is, let's say you find something that you really like. Why not try to figure out how to mimic it? Because, it's drum sounds are, I mean, yes, they're unique to songs, but they're also, the techniques are all pretty similar in terms of how you get there. And so, I try to practice as much as possible. If I find a drum sound that I really like in a song, maybe I'll extract it and have it as a sample sitting in my tune. But then before I finish that song or release it, I'm going to try to get close to it with a variety of my own drum packs and do my own sound design with reverbs and whatnot, or compression, to get to that drum sound if I have to.
Yeah. So
But my rule of thumb is I recreate it. My rule of thumb is, at this point, I don't release anything that has even the potential of any dangerous lawsuits. I just don't do it. That's my approach. So
The safe approach.
Yep.
So I wanted to ask you, like, what is the proper clearing process? And for instance, I know like a lot of people are into YouTube sampling these days. Is it enough to just, and I get this sometimes myself, a comment in the YouTube video that says, hey man, can I use this track in this video for something? And, I might reply yes or no, or send me an email or something like that. Is that enough to make it legal?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I'll give you the answer from like everyday perspective, and then the attorney answer, right? So from an everyday perspective, like if somebody has done some sound on YouTube, and then somebody asks a question in any written form that says, hey, may I use it? And you reply back, yes, you may. Or, better yet, what you do, which is via email, so there's a written record of it, that's good and that's sufficient, right? Because essentially you're giving permission for somebody to use something you've created, which you hold a copyright on, okay? Here's where it gets troubling. So this is the lawyer answer. A lot of times, what that does is we don't know where the burden is on who has the ability to give that permission. So for example, let's say I post a YouTube video on it, and in that YouTube video, I have, pictures or samples of, say, Game of Thrones stuff. And, I'm using like a dragon sound on Game of Thrones to create a bass sound that I'm going to use in a dubstep track. Okay. And I use that as an example in a video. Then somebody comes up and says, oh, I really like that. Can I use that sound that I grabbed right off your YouTube video? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Go right ahead. Right. I've given permission to use my video, but I don't have the right to, give somebody permission to use that Game of Thrones original soundbite of that dragon sound. You see what I'm saying? So I'm not able to give all the rights to somebody, even though I say, sure, go ahead. So, and ultimately what's going to happen is that whoever uses that sample is going to be on the hook for having used an unauthorized sample. And I may be on the hook for having passed it along. So just think through, those issues. Like in your case, a lot of your videos are showcasing, I remember when Wavetable first came out and you did like a half an hour video of just Wavetable drones and stuff. And that was awesome. So if somebody wants to use a piece of that, you made that so you can give permissions to it. But if you're unable to give permissions to something, or you've created sound using an unauthorized sample, you are not able to give permission to use that unauthorized sample. The original copyright holder always has to give that permission. Mm-hmm. But how that permission is conveyed is fine. Usually, as an attorney, I always prefer all of that stuff to be in writing. It doesn't have to be a formal agreement or a release agreement or any of that stuff. I mean, I'd like that, but that's usually cost prohibitive and slow given the speed of how things work on the internet these days. So an email is usually sufficient, where you could ask somebody for permission. They say yes. If they ever come back and sue that person down the road, you can always say, hey, but you gave permission. Here's an email, right? So I think that's usually sufficient.
Now, take that wavetable video you mentioned, right? I didn't copyright any of that stuff. You know, I never sent it in or got any sort of documentation. Right. So would a person be out of line if they just did it and they liked something I did on there and just used it? Would I have any sort of legal copyright claim? Like,
yeah, you would. You know, because you as a copyright holder essentially gets the right to copyright when they create something, when it's a creative work, right? They've created it, so they own the copyright to it. Now, there's also kind of a competing, and this is going to get a little beyond me because I'm not a strict IP lawyer, so I may not say this as perfectly as I should, but there's an issue here of, you know, you being able to prove that you were the first person to have created this, and simply by publishing that video, you have a timestamp that shows when you first created this. This is your work. Okay. So if somebody takes that and puts it in a song and you want to go after them, you have the right to do that. You know, not all works necessarily need to be filed with, you know, the Library of Congress for copyrights or the USPTO for trademarks or whatnot, in order for, you know, you to go after somebody saying you came up with it first. You have to be able to prove it. So the idea is, if you have something you want to copyright, whether it's, you know, a video, a piece of audio, whatever, you'll want to, you know, capture that and send it in to the Library of Congress, which is where you register your copyrights. But again, there's so much media now, and you know, it's cost prohibitive because each submission, I think, is like $50.
Yeah.
But how do you keep up with all that? You know? A more likely scenario is exactly what we just talked about here, which is maybe somebody rips off a piece of your video, puts it in the song. You probably won't hear that unless the song becomes commercially very popular. And at that point, now you have, you know, a potential claim, and, you know, you'll seek out an attorney who will reach out to that party or that record company and say, hey, this is an unauthorized sample and we want to get paid. So that's what's going to go down.
So the way that could be proved is that I uploaded this video on this date, which is before they produced their content. Now, would that apply for like project files on your computer? Like if you had, say, the Ableton Live or the Pro Tools file of the original tracks, and someone comes along and tries to reuse it or something?
I think that's much harder to prove because it's not on a public, you know, third-party authenticated database, right? If it's sitting on your files, you know, you're going to have to prove up your files with a timestamp and prove up with experts that was the actual date when it was created. That's much harder to prove, and that's, well, you know, that's not. I think that would be much more difficult in a practical courtroom situation.
Right.
Whereas, you know, the fact that you published yours on YouTube and emails went out about it to your list, and it's published on, you know, various Ableton related forums, those are much more, you know, neutral ways of proving up that this piece of art existed,
right?
You know, before this other thing came out. So.
Right, because I could fool my computer into thinking it's like 1997,
yeah,
and put out
right,
you know, some popular Bruno's Mars song.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you know, back in the day, before when we were
Hmm.
kids, before we had any money to file anything with any sort of library,
Hmm.
we used to
Yeah,
do what
yeah.
I was
You
told
mail
was,
it to yourself, right?
yes, the poor man's copyright,
Uh huh.
where we would
Uh huh.
mail our demo tapes to ourselves and leave them in the envelope.
Uh huh.
Is
Uh
that
huh.
is
Yeah,
that
because
legit?
so
Is
essentially what it is that so just to let all the kids know because they don't know we're all dating ourselves. But
yeah.
back in the day,
Back when there was
what we
real
would do is
mail.
we'd take our demo whatever tape CD whatever it is, put it in an envelope and mail it to ourselves. And what that would do is effectively that would have a sealed envelope that had a postmark on it. So, the U.S. Mail Service put a date stamp on it. So that essentially proved that that medium or that captured art form existed, on that date, right?
Yeah.
So that has essentially gone away because you can't just mail it to yourself and expect that you have a copyright. I think that's probably for the better. If I were to, give an opinion on it, I think that's probably better because that way you don't have multiple ways of trying to prove something happened before. You have a hard and fast rule, which is if you want to protect something, go get it copyrighted, send it in.
Well, yeah, I could see that making sense because I've received
Yeah.
stuff in the mail that wasn't sealed, and
Yeah.
I
Sure.
could easily put in like some old Aerosmith song in there and say,
Sure.
that was my song.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
Now that is that like I guess if someone say they beat you to the punch and they copyright your thing before you do, which people could do like crazy to me with like
Hmm.
YouTube videos, for instance. Um, is it then like it's now the burden is on me to try to prove that I had access to that or I created that before?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So that's
So,
where,
if somebody has filed and they've received a copyright, then
Mhm.
it's up to you to disprove that because they've taken the steps to file first, right?
Right.
And so it's now up to you to prove that occurred before. And so that's why I think having these third party, social media and other methods to have your art out there, is probably the best way to, prove that had existed before the copyright was filed. And so, I mean, this leads to a really interesting question about how you protect your brand or your name. So, for example, I've been using the artist name Nebulae since 1992. Okay. I mean, that's how far back that goes. Like my first Nebulae album was 92. Since 95, I think I've owned the domain name, or 97, I've owned the domain name, like nebulae.com. And so,
I'm
like,
impressed with
I've
your
never,
loyalty to the name. As we talked, I recently dropped my name. I've
yeah,
had other names in the past, and so yeah, I'm
uh-huh.
impressed with that loyalty,
Yeah.
commitment.
But part of it is also just like there are multiple Nebulas all over the internet producing music,
Mhm.
multiple. And every time I find one, I'll drop them a note, like it's on Bandcamp, or if I see them online or SoundCloud, I'll be like, hey, how you doing? Like just put myself out there, and I never get a response because I think people freak out because they think, oh my God, does this? And I'm like, look, I don't care. Use Nebulae as much as I don't care. Go ahead and use it. And there's actually an Italian death metal band named Nebulae, and it's really funny. Like you get on Spotify and if you search Nebulae, there's this guy in Amsterdam that's putting out like hard trance music. There's this death metal band in Italy that's putting out, that kind of stuff. And then there's, little old me, right? And I'm totally fine with that. But I've never gone ahead and trademarked Nebulae. I could, but somebody else grabbed it. I think maybe a couple of years ago, somebody grabbed Nebulae Music, but they're not doing anything with it. So I could do that, but my strategy has been take every asset I can find out there. So Facebook.com/Nebulae is me. Twitter.com Nebulae is me. Nebulae.com is me, right? Like
Mhm.
I've got the three biggest assets on the internet for my name. So whoever wants to take it, go ahead. I don't think there's going to be any likelihood of confusion. More importantly, nobody will ever be able to tell me I can't use it, ever. Because I can prove going back to 1992, before there was an internet, that I've been using it consistently, right?
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting approach, but that's what I would say is anytime something new comes out, I'll go on there and just register /Nebulae, right? And that'll be I'll take the piece of real estate. So, basically I'm using squatters' rights at this point. Like I've been sitting on this asset for, going on now, 25, 27 years.
Yeah.
So, and that's my approach. So,
Nice.
and I love it every time somebody, hits me up, because I get a lot of requests for that domain name. So people will be like, no, I'd like to purchase your domain name. And, usually my favorite response is just the word no. Just no. And my favorite response back to somebody was somebody made me the offer and I just said no. And they came back and said, you, sir, are a scholar and a gentleman, which made me laugh for a while. It's like, okay, you have a sense of humor too. That's fine.
Direct, no nonsense.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, that's cool too. That works.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we do have a lot of stuff, but man, it would be really tough, like you said, to copyright every little thing officially.
Yeah.
So get it on
I mean,
SoundCloud,
it's just cost prohibitive. Like I think, for example, you put it, you can, I think per submission is $50. And so think about it. Every single you have is $50 to copyright. Come on. Right.
Yeah.
And there's all these sorts of old school rules on what comprises a single versus what's an album, is it all in the same medium, and I mean, these days, I could use one song in one album and the same song in another album or a collection or an EP. And man, I just think it's getting very difficult for everyday people to put music out, right? And have it protected. So my approach is publish it all everywhere, right? I use DistroKid as my distributor of choice. It's $20 a year for unlimited releases. So I put it out through that. It's just shoots it out to, Apple Music, Amazon, YouTube, and Spotify, which is the biggest, streamers on the web. And then I also put it out on Bandcamp and I put it out on SoundCloud. Like it's everywhere. And so, I mean, why do I care about, protecting it through the government or registering it when it's out everywhere, date stamped, and people are listening to it, So,
well,
it's a different approach. So.
Yeah. Well, it's, I guess that ruins my excuse to not put out music. That's too expensive. That's why I'm not putting out music. That's why I haven't released it. It's not like any
we
sort
can
of
come up with better excuses like midlife crisis or something like that.
But there you go. I know there's a lot of people hesitant to put out music, just worried about what people are going to think, or they're uncomfortable. It's not finished. It could be better.
Yeah.
Well, there's a good reason to put it out. So,
that's a really interesting topic, right? I've really suffered from that. I guess we're segueing, but let's do that. I've actually really suffered from that as a result, because I put out a bunch of stuff and, I'm not necessarily proud of a lot of it. And for some reason now when I listen to older stuff, I react from, oh, that's a really great idea, to, my God, I'm cringing at how bad this is, right? Like I'm very self-critiquing with my old stuff. But instead of making that make me want to make better music or redo that song in a better way or something like that, or take that idea and go to the next level with it, essentially I've become very hypercritical of anything that I make. And I don't know how to get past that at this point. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's really held me back from putting things out. And I'm not sure how to combat that feeling, right? Because when I listen to something that I've created or what I'm trying to create now, I hit a brick wall so fast now where it's just like, oh, okay, well, this idea sucks. I'm moving on, right? But that's not the case. And often there's a whole bunch of really good material there to work with. But I've become very, very hypercritical. So
Yeah.
I wonder if you have thoughts about that and how you work through that.
I have thoughts, but it's one thing to think it and another to actually do it. You know, a lot of this stuff I
Yeah.
understand intellectually, but maybe
Sure.
it's like emotionally when I go to do it. I've run into these problems all the time, and
Sure.
so it sounds like you might come up with an idea, you start working, and then you hit this point where you get critical of it and you drop it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, or it just kind of sits there and doesn't go to that next level or do anything, you know? And so, you know, it's dangerous because, you know, like the idea of thinking that you're going to break new ground with everything all the time is kind of dangerous and also unrealistic.
Right.
And I just don't think it's a rational way to look at any kind of art form. And sometimes doing things that are just kind of fun is a great way to come up with an idea that could break new ground, but you know, but I don't give myself the chance to get there because I end up kind of going, this is terrible, you know, like, or this is not original. And not everything needs to be 100% original, but I think I've entered this phase where I'm extremely, extremely self-critical these days.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. It's really dampened my ability to put stuff out at the frequency that I would like. And then what I end up finding happens is that I reach this kind of place of like musical atrophy where if I'm not doing it enough, I get rusty with certain things, whether it's my guitar playing where, you know, like simplest things make my fingers hurt and that's debilitating, right? To make more music, or like little things like, you know, like, give you an example. Did you see, Yuta's, video at Loop where he was talking about how repetition is an essential form of music and that any kind of repetition gets your brain to start thinking something is musical?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a awesome video.
It was an awesome video, right?
Great reminder.
I found myself like, great. Yeah. And I found it was an awesome video, but then what I loved about it, and I found myself really like getting so jealous, is that when his like 2-minute reminder buzzer went off and it went ding, meaning he had to show an example and get off the stage in like 2 minutes. And he was just a ninja with the MIDI, right? Like he just like it's so fast. He was putting in notes and creating chord structures and changing things around with his, you know, arrow keys on stage, knowing that the clock was ticking and he had to kind of explain what he had just talked about so fast, right? And I remember watching that going, God, like there was a time when I was that fast. And now I am not, you know, because I've just gotten rusty with my tools or the what do you call it? The muscle memory of like being able to do things fast and efficiently. And I think those are all barriers for not being able to produce, you know, music well. I think when you get off of the frequency of production, like for example, you know, your emails with creating packs have increased in frequency in the last I guess couple of months. I've noticed more product or more output from you. I think that the more you do, the better you get, and the better, you know, the more it just kind of builds on itself. And I think the same is true when the momentum goes the other way. Like the less you do, the worse you get, and the harder it is to put more and more stuff out. And I'm working desperately to try to reverse this momentum that I've been on for probably about 3 years now. You know, in the last 3 years, I've put out maybe 2 songs. I mean, I've generated probably 100 ideas, but I finished maybe 2 or 3 songs at most. I put out a bunch of like just bullshit music where it's just fun stuff that I've put out. There's a couple of pieces that I put on SoundCloud that are just kind of silly and funny. But what I would call really good songs, I've only done maybe 2 or 3. And so I'm desperately trying to reverse that because, that's not enough for me. Right. So
I can relate to all of this well.
Yeah.
Even speaking of guitar playing, I've recently picked up my guitar to play something, something I heard I wanted to figure out how to play. And I was surprised at like how my fingers weren't going where they were supposed to, So I've spent some time in the last 2 weeks or so doing exercises on guitar. And I've been like really happy with how much it's helped, and it comes back fast. I think once you already had it.
Sure.
But I know like I used to be a lot better.
and
now I'm like, man, I got to get back to that. And it's like kind of like what you said with you to like really blasting through the MIDI. Like it's fresh in his mind, obviously. When you watch that video, like he's able to just fly through this stuff, and he's explaining what he's doing. He's got like 2 separate things happening.
It was masterclass.
Yeah.
It was masterclass. I was both, in awe and completely envious at the same time. Like when people are that good at something and it's like just effortlessly flowing through their fingers, whatever they're thinking, it's like, yeah, that's fantastic, So.
That video, along with all these things we're talking about, will be in the show notes if you're listening. So you don't have to go hunt too hard. But yeah, I think that comes with like the familiarity. That's a hard word for me to say. Familiarity of just
I
these
don't think
processes.
that's the word.
But you know what I'm saying? Like he's doing this all the time, and so it's there for him.
Yeah.
And when you're not doing stuff, it slips. I think to kind of like go back to some of this stuff, it's so important to work a lot and just keep doing things. This is something I really internalized when I was talking to Sahil Lavingia of Gumroad on the podcast, and he's a painter, and he was saying how when you only work on like this one thing, I've got this one track, this one painting, it becomes just way too precious. And you build it up in your head, and like then you get nervous about it and scared about it. But when you're doing like paintings every single day, none of them are really that precious. And you're going through the process, just like producing a song, you're going through the start, the middle, and the finishing part all the time, over and over. And you're also much more willing to take chances.
Right.
So since this is not my precious one song of the year, what the hell? Let's try doing something weird. Let's break some rules. Let's experiment, and maybe something cool will come out of that. So I think and plus, your chops are always being worked on and improved. I think that's definitely an important part, to just go through the motions, even if you're kind of not always there with it. I tend to find like for me, getting myself to start making music is one of the hardest parts. My ideas, when I first come up with them, are these little baby infant ideas. And as much as I might love them at the start, there's always this point where I compare it to something. And I think about like some other song, some other artist, or even other things I've done myself. And I realize like, oh, this thing's not as good as that. But it's so unfair to put that baby idea in comparison with these other things that have been polished, or other artists who are working maybe with teams, and this is their final product over many revisions. Comparison is definitely like a creativity killer in a lot of ways. That's a tough one.
I would say comparison. That's a really great perspective. That comparison, I mean, each idea stands on its own, and some are better than others. But comparing something to the finished product of other people
Yeah.
is a very easy way to kill your ideas. Very, very easy. And so I think that's a really valuable nugget there. And then I also think that the fact that when you're doing a ton of these, none of them have to be special,
Yeah.
which actually is an interesting paradox, because that's where something special usually comes out, is
Right.
when you're thinking less about it and willing to take a risk on it. So those are all really, really good nuggets.
Kind of let
Yep.
it happen more, I guess.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've been around friends and maybe they're working on a song or they're strumming an idea on their guitar or whatever. And I've thought to myself privately, that's stupid. I don't like that. That's
Right.
a cool chord. It's not smart enough. It doesn't have enough weird inversions, all these like nonsense you get in your
Right.
head. And then maybe a day later, I hear like what they did with it and it's like an awesome song. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
damn, like I would have let that go. I would have had that
Right.
idea in my hands and just thrown it away. And it's
Right.
because they were like persistent with it. They stayed with it. They followed through
Right.
on it. It became something interesting.
Yeah.
It's an important thing to remember for me. Definitely, because I get in my head so fast. I think we all probably do. We get in our head and as soon as something cool starts happening, you start imagining what it could become and it takes on this new significance. But I've seen that a lot where ideas I didn't really think were all that great become something I loved.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And kind of what I also do sometimes now, and I find myself doing this a lot now, is when I get to that stage where I'm starting to hit those brick walls, I go back to what worked in the past. And sure, I often say to myself, God, if I had all this power now, back in my early 20s when I was super creative and much more willing to take chances, I can only imagine the kind of music I'd make. But I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I really think there's something to the idea of limiting yourself with the tools that you have. And if the tools themselves are infinite, then limiting the tools to what you have so that you're not burdened by infinite choices, right? So I've over the years gotten to the point where I have very few VSTs. I try to limit my sample packs down to just the ones that are very super interesting and creative to me. I go for simplicity rather than complex, sound creation or sound manipulation. I go for things that, enable me to move quickly. And that's another reason why I keep coming back to live. Every once in a while I'll look at Reaper or Studio One or other tools, just to see what's out there. And, I keep coming back to anything that provides a simplicity of being able of a workflow, being able to get things done in a very simple manner. So that's where the limitation of the tool and the limitation of the work, not the limitation of the workflow, but the limitation of setting yourself so you don't have infinite choices, creates, a smooth workflow to be able to get more things done. And I'm now at a point where, and I never thought I'd get to this point, but I don't think I could ever use any other DAW. I just don't think I could use other tools that make me take multiple steps to do simple things like sidechain audio or routing audio or create submixes or, so like all these people will say, okay, you got to use the Valhalla reverb. And I think, I like Live's reverb. It's easy. I know it.
Yeah.
You've got to use Fab Filter EQs. Well, I like EQ8. It's easy. I know it.
Yeah.
Things like that, where, just like, like for example, now you've got you know, like what, 3 or 4 different prominent wavetable synthesizers. And even wavetable, I like a lot, but I keep going back to Serum because it's easy. I know it.
Mhm.
I just stick to what I know, not because I'm afraid of learning new things, but you know, I already have an infinite number of choices, and I just want to limit myself with what I know so that I can get down to the music making part.
I think you're hitting on probably the number one problem these days with making music and a lot of things, really, even just spending your own time. Like, how do you enjoy your time? I mean, you have
Mm-hmm.
infinite possibilities. You could, with phones and everything, you could spend forever, just never see half of it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we have too many choices, and it's paralyzing to think there's all these different
Right.
things we can do. You
Right.
said before, and I had the same thing myself when I had a 4-track tape recorder, a guitar, and a microphone. I was so productive. I made so many little songs
Mm-hmm.
all the time, filled up tapes and tapes and tapes because I didn't have time. There was nothing to think about. If I had a drum kit around, it was the drum kit that was around. It wasn't
Right.
900,000 snare samples that I can choose from. And it wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just that's the kit, and I got one mic for
Right.
it.
Right.
And it just eliminated all those choices. The
Yeah.
problem is new gear is fun, and there is like kind of this like magic excitement that does happen when you try out something new. You get it, whether it's a new plugin or a synth or guitar or DAW. There's exciting things that happen that are kind of like new ideas because the tool is new, and maybe you're not even
Right.
using it completely right, and you do something interesting. So
Right.
that's the weird pull. Like every time something new comes out, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, that reverb does sound, Valhalla does sound pretty nice. Maybe I should try that too.
Right. Right. Right.
But
Right.
we
And by the way, it does
it
sound amazing. I'm not crapping on any of the
no,
tools that I mentioned. I'm simply I'm
I
simply
know.
saying that, like, you know, like I'm of this mentality now where anything new that I take on has to somehow significantly improve my workflow or how I'm creating audio. Otherwise, why would I? I don't. Why would I take on something that could potentially limit, you know, my workflow, or not limit? Sorry, it would, somehow impact my workflow in a way that stops my ability to produce something faster.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't, unless something has a clear, definitive, like for example, for many years, I was using Yuhi Zebra, and I still use it because it's just got that super warm analog sound. But I find Serum and Wavetable now, even if I were to create um, something that I wanted analogish, I would probably go to Serum first because I can create that analogish tone, but the signal itself is just a clean, crisp signal for production purposes. And so so that's become my synth of choice. Um, Even though, and then that happens, for example, back in the day, I was using Silent One as my favorite synth. And then from that, I moved on to Zebra as my favorite synth. And now, it's Serum. And so, every once in a while, something will come along that's a game changer, and it's worth taking on learning something new for me. Um, but I'm much more conservative in adding new tools these days.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy way to look at it. I mean, it's nice to freshen things up a little, throw a new ingredient in,
Right.
that
Right.
that can often spark something. But we have to find ways, I have to find ways of limiting what I'm doing and putting up walls. And um I'm having this myself right now with like style of music, even where I want to make, I've been making like some of these like kind of like ambient tracks Then I've been making more like singer-songwriter songs. I want to do like rock band stuff, and I wind up not doing anything. Or
Yeah.
like I just dabble for a minute, then I go somewhere else. I try, oh, maybe I should add this. And then next thing I know, I'm in this world of options and possibilities, and I wind up not doing anything.
Is it because you're bored of the style you've made for a while, or do you just find different styles inspiring you?
Yeah.
The reason I asked the question is because um, I found, so one of the reasons I love Spotify so much is beyond just the convenience and the fact that they have the streaming game nailed down. I find that the biggest return of value from Spotify is once it learns your habits,
Yeah.
it gives you, the Discovery Weekly playlist is just unbelievable in terms of exposing you to things you never even heard of.
He knows what you're gonna like.
And yeah, and in the last 3 years of being a heavy Spotify user, I look back at my playlists. I look back at things that I've liked in those years, and it's almost like a revealing thing where Spotify shows me where my interests are, what styles I lean toward, and it's an interesting mix of stuff I grew up with, which was the Manchester scene back in the '80s with like New Order and the Smiths and all that, and then stuff that I lean toward now. And in any weekly Discover weekly playlist, of those 30 or 50 songs, whatever they give you, there's like a good percentage of stuff that sounds like, that stuff I grew up with, modern stuff, slightly poppy stuff, some EDM stuff. I mean, kind of the things that I listen to and the things that I like to make, but it isn't part of any one specific genre. And in fact, some of the songs come out, some of the songs that are referred to me have, like an EDM song with elements of guitar in it, or a guitar song with, some interesting electronic drums in it, or, it's kind of like genre bending stuff. And as a result of listening to that and having that kind of be my music discovery, where I'll follow a band from there or follow an artist and start listening to other things that they've produced, I'm starting to get my own interesting genre bending ideas. So I guess in a long-winded way, I'm saying that I find myself feeling like the modern landscape of music these days defy genre more than they used to. And a lot more artists are doing multi genre music because there's far less of a need these days for somebody. I mean, everybody has their sound, but back in the day, in order to make yourself marketable, you had to create a sound and stick to your sound, so that you were more marketable. And I think that that's changing now. I think a lot more artists are doing much more, they're being much more lax or liberal and stepping outside the bounds of one particular genre. Do you find the case that to be true with you?
Yeah, well, I'm not bored with it. It's that the problem is I'm excited by them all.
Yeah,
which is better, obviously, but I guess, I might go on a car ride and travel through many different worlds, of music.
Yeah, sure.
Part of what you said earlier about the attorney work is the main that's like the money stuff, right? That's how you make your living.
Yeah.
So one of the nice things about not making music your main stream of income is you have a little more freedom with that, because I mean, it would be weird. There are certain artists, like, they just can't go to some other genre of music. It would just, what is this? Like, what are you doing? That's not what you do. People are expecting one thing. Whereas, people like me and you, like, first of all, no one really cares what I do anyway. But
Yeah, right.
But there's so much more freedom in that's not like the main thing. Where if I decide, like, if I've been making a lot of like electronic based music and then I decide I want to just sing a song with an acoustic guitar, there's no like major career risk happening.
Right.
There's none of that, which is
So it's once again the idea of being able to take a chance without any real repercussions and actually coming up with something that might be very interesting simply because you're not
yeah,
worried about it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Where I think I could use a little help is maybe deciding like, okay, this month or something, I'm working on this thing and that I'm doing that thing. Cause I don't know. I don't even know why it needs to be a thing, I guess, but it, the, the limitations thing is important, but I think also like having the plan is important too. Like,
Yeah.
having like the target set up that I know what I'm aiming for, because so often I come down to make music and I'm like, what are we gonna do today? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Let's fool around for
Mm-hmm.
a while and like see what catches my attention, and
Mm-hmm.
then I wind up just not doing anything half the time. So having like a clear direction, I think is something I'm gonna have to like whip myself into shape for and just stick to it a little bit. And limiting myself within those within that direction, because still I could decide I want to make some kind of rock song, but then I could add drum machine synthesizers and vocal samples, and
Sure.
I could just continue. I could just go down that same road of endless possibilities, even though I have maybe
Well,
something in mind.
I also think that these days, the idea of electronic music is kind of ridiculous because everything is technically electronic,
Yeah,
and then again, so I think it's more of a flavor or an attitude, right? I mean, like you've got stuff coming out of Nashville, which are country songs with like a 909 drums.
yeah,
I mean, it's just funny, right? And
right.
so and it works. And like the big Avicii record, like turned kind of, acoustic music on its head with putting EDM beats underneath. So I don't know what's electronic or not anymore. I do know that like, every band out there uses pitch correction. Everybody out there uses, sequence drums. Everybody has elements of something or another. And I think that's breaking down these purist walls, which is kind of a good thing, I think,
Hmm.
because it allows you to kind of experiment outside your own kind of self-limiting box, right? Because then it might be interesting, and you don't know till you try. I love when people take things from one genre, blend it into another, and it turns into something really magical. And I think that's pretty inspiring stuff. And I'll tell you that we talked a little bit about the fact that I haven't been making very many published songs. I've had a bunch of great ideas, but nothing has finished. The last thing I just put out was actually a collaboration with a local artist who does a lot of soundtrack work. And so he does a lot of scoring and composing for films and soundtracks. And so, and I'm very inspired by strings and orchestral stuff. And so, when I hear his music, I hear about all the things like I'd want to add to it. And so I approached him and I said, "Hey, if you ever want to collaborate, let me know." And he sent over some tracks, and then I added guitar and bass and programmed some drums to it. And I think what came out is so some of my best stuff in a long time. And I really really liked what came out of it, because as much as I love orchestral music, I don't write it. And so to have him produce that part of it, and then me take over and then do some of my alt rock dance stuff underneath it, came out very interestingly. So I think that's pretty cool. It's definitely one way to keep inspired and breaking new ground.
Which release was that? So we can put that in the episode, the
Uh,
notes.
so it's called The Delta, and it's on Spotify.
Okay,
Um, let me see where it is. If you
we'll get
look
that
on my
up.
Spotify page, or if you just go to nebulae.com,
Hmm.
it's posted right there.
Cool.
Yeah, it's called The Delta. I did that. Um, yeah, let's just see here.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it should be right there. So let me just see if it's on nebulae.com. Yep.
Yeah, so I see a SoundCloud link to it. Um,
Yeah,
Stephen Moore.
yeah, it's on SoundCloud, but I think it's also on. So there's if you go to nebulae.com, the first thing is follow me on Spotify. If you click that, that should get you to my Spotify page, and it's the Delta with Stephen Moore.
Nice. Well, I think collaboration is a great way to
Yeah, definitely.
light the spark. That's been a great go-to for me over the years. Is just
Yeah.
getting together with friends and making some music, and it's nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to, especially if you can find people that have strengths where you don't, or they have like certain abilities that you don't, and maybe you have something that they don't have. I mean, great. I mean, if they're a drummer and you're a guitar player, that's obviously awesome. But it could be a lot of other things too. Maybe they're really good with chord progressions or whatever it is. It can be so refreshing to have that
Sure, yeah.
exchange. I mean, that's really, it's so funny to me when I start saying like, you should play music with other people, because that's the way it
Right.
has been for 99.9% of any musical history, that you played with people
Sure.
and interacted.
Right.
And it's now, like in just the last really few years, decade or two maybe, it's really flipped where people are so much more isolated, trying to do everything. And
well, so this is an interesting conversation. So, do you know the masterclass series that that produces a really high quality videos on
yeah,
you know, various topics? So
like everything,
you know,
it seems like.
like Gordon Ramsay teaches cooking or whatever.
Yeah.
There's one that's really being, you know, promoted right now with Timbaland, right? And he has a production class, and it's all, you know, hip hop, but it's also really interesting just watching snippets of that where he's like, oh, I've got this great idea. So he then goes in front of his mic and he mouths out the rhythm, and then it gets captured. And then he comes and sits back at his workstation, and then he's got like 3 people, right? There's the guy running his Pro Tools rig, there's the guy running the Logic rig, and there's another guy who is running Live and other synths and whatnot. And then, you know, and then Timbaland is sitting in front of, you know, Push 2 with his Ableton rig in front of him. And when he has an idea, or somebody else has an idea, and they all kind of freely, you know, cross-reference each other, or, you know, share files in this networked studio. But essentially, they're all using modern music production techniques to essentially jam as a band, right? But it's not just one person. And, you know, I was watching this, you know, snippet, this video with my girlfriend, and she was like, yeah, this is really interesting how he makes music. And I said, guess what? I have to do all of those things. Yeah. Like when I sit in front of my rig, I've got to be the artist, the idea generator. I got to be the person who is the engineer who captures it correctly. Then I got to be the guy who, you know, runs the rig itself, meaning, you know, does the work of getting the files and organizing them and cutting and putting them all together. And then I've got to be the music producer that essentially puts the finished product out. And those are all separate roles that you're seeing right here happen. And when you have that, you know, a team, a well-oiled machine, or a good team like that does all that, they all feed off of each other, and the sum is greater than the parts, right? But as we've gotten more and more into just bedroom production, we're all by ourselves doing all of these things. It's no wonder that we hit these brick walls, right? Because we're not effectively working with other people. And that's why when you collaborate, even with one other person, suddenly you have this influx of a whole different set of ideas that inspires you to, make something new.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to get outside your own comfort zone when you're working with somebody like that. And that's usually where the best stuff comes out, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, making music is it takes a long time, and you're gonna naturally have like highs and lows throughout that period. And
yeah,
sometimes, you just whether you're running out of energy or whatever, you're gonna hit a low. And usually, if you're collaborating, there's the waves never really cancel each other out. There's
yeah,
so
nice.
like I mean, it's like working out with other people too. It's I found it's way easier to push myself when there's a bunch of other people doing it too,
Sure,
as opposed
sure.
to like by myself, because I
Yeah.
might be tired and think I'm gonna die or something, and I look around, I'm like, well, he's still doing it, and she didn't stop, and oh, all right.
Mm-hmm.
And then like
Mm-hmm.
you find out after class or something, like they were like, I only kept going because you were going. I'm like, I only kept going because you were going. But like the
Yeah,
team pulls each other, and you lose that on your own. You don't have
right,
you just
right.
have yourself, so it's easy to be like, all right, I'm tired now. I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
The energy is so important. And you're right, we are
Mm-hmm.
taking on many different jobs that back in the old days, and even still in like bigger productions, are teams of people,
Yeah,
trying to
sure. Teams
play.
that you never even hear about.
Yeah.
I saw the same thing when I saw a snippet of was it the Armin van Buuren masterclass.
Hmm.
Um, and it was like he's feeding off of his partner who I didn't know existed, and they work on all these songs together. And whereas Armin is the one on stage getting all the glory, he's not the only person.
Yeah.
The only video that I saw of those masterclasses where there was one person was Deadmau5. And what I thought was really funny was he spent such a large majority, and this is his personality too, right? That he's just cranky. But he spent a large majority of that video just with this like hand in his head and like pulling his hair out, going, "What? Why? How?" Just like cranky, being like
Yeah.
cranky Deadmau5. And I just wondered if that isn't like indicative of what's happening here, which is that okay, well, if you're going to make music by yourself,
Oh
maybe
man,
you're just miserable and cranky.
I
But
can
if
relate.
you're making music with other people,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Oh man,
Um,
I can't tell you how many times I've been like, why isn't it working? What's wrong?
right.
Where maybe another person be like, all right, let's just try something different. And then I'd be out of
Yeah,
that
right,
whole
exactly.
mode. But when you're on your own, you just keep going down the spiral.
Hmm.
Yeah, you need someone to just kind of slap you in the face and say, hey, come on.
Yeah, right, right. Shall
Crazy.
we start maybe wrapping up?
I think so.
Um,
Yeah. We've gone wild here.
yeah. I don't know if we stuck to your game plan at all or not, but yeah, you tell me.
Yeah. We hit on a lot of things I wanted to talk about. I appreciate you sharing so much about the legal perspective, but also just that you too have these same things that I have, and I know a lot of other people have too, these same blocks. It's incredible. Like, you see people all over, they're successful, they're putting out music, they're doing this, they're doing that. And then, you realize, well, they struggle too. No one has found
Sure.
like the easy ticket. Then they're just smooth sailing and everything falls into place for them. Everyone is fighting through
Right.
all of these same
Hmm.
challenges and same difficulties. And it's really nice to talk to someone like you and hear what you go through and how you try to approach it and what works and what doesn't work. It's definitely something I'm going to take with me. So I thank you for that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. And I appreciate being able to talk to you about it. It's interesting how similar, these perspectives are. And I think, for those of your listeners who are listening, and they, they hit these creative moments and then they don't, put stuff out because they're worried about what people are going to think or whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just want to be able to tell them, man, when you're creative and you're actually having creative output, just put put it all out. Just get it all out there. Get it into the world, you know, because I've been there when I've been really creative, and now I'm struggling to be creative again. And like, you know, the world's a better place with more music in it. So, you know, get it out there, you know, and, you know, I hope to join all of you soon, you know, with more pieces of my own. I hope, you know.
Well, yeah, we worry about what people think. Half the time someone puts something out, I think, oh man, how did they get that done? How did they do it? Where do they find the time? How do they manage to get their music finished and complete? And where did they get that idea? So yeah, we're always our own worst critics. I think maybe we ought to change this podcast to the music production support group or something.
Right.
These are not issues unique to anybody, it seems. It's in fact maybe what we all have in common, that we're all slugging through it, and just it's a blast and it's a lot of fun, but it's also like torture.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It can be it can be like the thing that I just take with me all day, worrying about and upset about, and I can't enjoy anything else because, oh man, I just can't get that right. There's like a great meme, you know, with like a couple lying around, and you know, what's wrong with him? And he's like, I wish I could get the snare drum right. He's like pouting in bed, and she thinks it's her or something.
Yeah.
You know, like I think we're all
Yeah.
like,
No, I've seen that one.
Yeah. It's so true though. But Abid, I thank you so much for your time and your generosity with your knowledge, and also your own struggles too. I appreciate that. It's, if nothing else, we can commiserate a little, and maybe something we said will help someone. I think it's gonna help me a little bit. Like, I think a lot of what you said makes a lot of sense, you know, for my own personal struggles. So thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me. I appreciate this, and it was a lot of fun. And let me know how it turns out, and I hope we can get some good feedback from it. And I look forward to doing it again down the road. That'd be fun.
Cool. So we'll send people to nebulae.com, nebulae.com. I'll have some show notes. You know, you click on the episode, you can see all these links, especially that sampling talk you gave at Loop was awesome. There's a ton of tutorials too you have, which are great, and lots of music to listen to too. So
yeah,
definitely everyone check all that out. And thank you everybody for listening. Have yourselves a wonderful day.